Okay, in video one, I left off talking about why I think Jennifer Lawrence is very likely an extrovert. And what the implication of that is that in her type's Jungian cognitive function stack, the dominant function would be an extroverted, orientated one. I believe that one is the so-called intuition, extroverted intuition. But I'll go into that further in detail to substantiate the NE part of it. But why I think she would definitely be an N within the Myers-Briggs temperament indicator system is because she's doing a whole lot of transcontextualization and saying all kinds of things that indicate that she has a kind of a real observation of herself from a distance as she goes about things. And just is a huge improviser and going by the seat of her pants in a lot of what she says, and often to comic effect. And anyway, I'll go into that further. I'll pony up some more evidence for the N preference in her case. Now, as for F, or what would be her preference in the MBTI for her temperamental preference for criteria for making decisions, I believe her to be on the F side, the so-called feeling side, just because, and again, I'll go into the sort of whole type sort of description later to substantiate, but I'm definitely getting a very warm feeling from her, which again is not much for any of you to go on, if those of you who don't have sort of feelers for that kind of thing. I do. I'm usually right when I, not always though, not always. I should make a note here that quite often the introverted feelers, particularly those with FI in prominence, like ISFP, INFP, people of those types, when they are not in an intimate setting they feel really comfortable in with the other people there, they may come off as thinkers a lot of the time because their faces tend to be so very, 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 very impassive. So just a caution about that, rule of thumb. You really always, with any kind of typing, you always have to consider a very wide array of different bits of evidence in composite, all against one another, to see if there's any sort of integrity to the thing before you can even begin to make a guess that that is at all likely to be close. So, all right, I think she's of the N. I also think she's of the F. And I also have, I'll make reference to specific instances of things she says to substantiate that coming up. So what are we left with? We're left with an ENF in that case, if you agree with me so far. So that narrows it down to 2 of the 16 MBTI types. That would have to be ENFP or ENFJ. And in the next videos, I'm going to be going into all kinds of detail that differentiates those 2 types from one another. And I should mention too that once you can guess what is in the upper 2 cognitive function stack slots for a given person, and then you can figure out what the emphasis is in terms of what they're using the most. And you have evidence for that, which I will argue again, the best evidence. I suggest taking in all kinds of things, and I'll admit that I do. But the evidence that really should be given the greatest weight, second, of course, to the person's own. This is the only legitimate way, is when a person calls it on themselves. They identify what their patterns of cognition are. But for the purpose of this kind of silly, just speculative, for the exercise of doing it kind of armchair typing, the best that you can do, I believe, is by looking at what people say. Again, not to say not to look at other things, but just that's the kind of evidence that I think should be given the greatest weight, because it's the closest proxy we have to what a person is actually thinking and how they're thinking. It's still open to interpretation widely. It's still very imprecise. It's still, it's all very shaky as evidence goes. However, it's far less shaky and it's far less open to interpretation than just straight behavioralism or, whatever it makes you think of or whatever the hell, If you can see how people are speaking and writing, that is the most precise reflection of their thought. And so that's where I think we should really be looking for the patterns. So next I'm going to go into differentiating ENFJ from ENFP and talk about it with a bit of with respect to that reel pasted in the description boxes of this series of Jennifer Lawrence. Thank you.